"Stop, do not silence her." The words fell into the grand marble hall like a thunderclap, cutting through the soft hum of a piano and the clinking of crystal glasses. Every head turned toward the staircase, where a young black maid stood frozen beside the grand piano, her hands trembling but her eyes steady. The billionaire's mansion was bathed in golden light, but for a moment it felt cold, almost airless. Mrs. Halden, the billionaire's wife, stood at the top of the stairs in a white silk gown, her face calm but her hand pressed tightly over the mouth of her daughter. The little girl's wide eyes shimmered with tears. She was 8 years old, pale, delicate, and known by everyone in the house as the mute child. But in that still second, the maid had heard a whisper, soft but clear, from the girl's lips. One single word: "Mommy." And then the silence that followed was sharper than a scream. "What did you just say?" Mrs. Halden's voice was smooth as glass, but her eyes flickered with something like panic. "Nothing, ma'am," the maid said quickly, her voice shaking. "I just thought I heard—" "You heard wrong," Mrs. Halden interrupted, her tone cutting, final. The guests exchanged puzzled looks, unsure whether to leave or pretend nothing had happened. The billionaire, Mr. Halden, glanced briefly at his wife and child, then back at his guests with a faint, uneasy smile. "Please, everyone, enjoy the evening," he said, trying to smooth over the tension. The orchestra resumed, though their music stumbled for a few notes before finding rhythm again. The maid's heart pounded. She stood perfectly still, staring at the little girl who now hid her face against her mother's shoulder. Had she imagined it? No, she knew what she had heard. It was not the wind, not the echo of a violin string. It was a child's voice, fragile, trembling, but real. She had worked in this house for only 2 months, long enough to learn the strict rules. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not question anything about the family. Do not mention the daughter's condition. But how could she stay silent now? Her mind replayed the moment again and again, the way the little girl's lips had moved, the way her mother's hand had flown instantly to stop her. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and yet, under the chandelier's cold light, everyone returned to their laughter and small talk as if nothing had broken. The maid took a slow step backward, her hands clasped in front of her apron. She caught one last glimpse of the child, her small fingers gripping her mother's dress, her eyes darting to the maid in quiet fear, as if begging her not to forget what she had just witnessed. Then the music swelled again, covering the truth with polite melodies, but the maid knew that moment would not leave her. That whisper, faint as a breath, had cracked open something far larger than anyone in that room could see. It was not the end of silence. It was the beginning. The following morning, the mansion was unusually quiet. The echo of laughter from the gala had faded into whispers behind closed doors. The young maid, whose name was Lila, walked through the long corridor holding a silver tray of breakfast tea. Her shoes made soft clicks against the marble floor, each sound swallowed by the heavy silence of the house. The portraits of the Halden family seemed to watch her as she passed, their painted eyes distant and proud. When she reached the child's room, she hesitated. Her hand trembled slightly before she knocked. "Good morning, Miss Evelyn," she said gently. There was no answer, only the faint rustle of curtains. When she entered, Mrs. Halden was sitting by the window, her perfect hair glinting in the morning Sunday. Evelyn, the little girl, sat beside her, silent as always, tracing a finger along the fogged glass. Lila placed the tray on the table. "Would you like me to bring breakfast for Miss Evelyn?" she asked carefully. Mrs. Halden did not turn around. "That will not be necessary. She will not be eating much today." Her voice was calm but sharp, like a piano note held too long. Lila hesitated, then said quietly, "She looks a bit pale, ma'am. Maybe some warm milk would help." "Lila," Mrs. Halden said, finally turning her gaze toward her, "your job is to clean, not to diagnose. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Lila replied quickly, lowering her eyes. But before she left, she caught Evelyn's reflection in the glass. The little girl's lips moved, almost imperceptibly. It was not a word, just a shape of one, and her eyes, those wide, silent eyes, were fixed on Lila with something like a plea. Lila froze. Then Mrs. Halden spoke again, softer now. It must be difficult, working in such a large home, surrounded by things you cannot understand. I appreciate your effort, but please remember that my daughter cannot speak. The doctors confirmed it years ago. Lila nodded, though her heart told her otherwise. Yes, ma'am. When she stepped into the hallway, the weight of the door closing behind her felt heavier than it should have. As she made her way down to the servants' quarters, whispers floated around her. The older maid, Ruth, leaned close and murmured, "Be careful, child." The last girl who worked upstairs asked too many questions. She was gone by sunrise. Lila's throat tightened. Gone where? Ruth shook her head. No one knows. The mistress does not like curiosity. Later that afternoon, Lila was dusting the library when Mr. Halden entered. He seemed distracted, papers in hand, the smell of cigar smoke trailing behind him. "Morning, sir," Lila said politely. He nodded absently, flipping through his files. His face looked weary, his eyes shadowed. "Sir," Lila began, hesitating, "may I ask something about Miss Evelyn?" He looked up briefly. "What about her? Has she ever tried to speak?" she asked. His brow furrowed. "She was born mute," he said flatly. "The specialists have confirmed that. Why?" Lila shook her head quickly. "Nothing, sir. I just wondered if maybe she understands more than people think." "Mr. Halden's expression softened for a second. "She is a bright child," he admitted quietly. "But her mother worries, sometimes too much." He looked out the tall window, his voice distant. "This house is full of memories she cannot bear to lose. I suppose silence feels safer than truth." Lila said nothing, but the words stayed in her mind. That evening, after dinner, she passed the staircase where the gala had taken place. The chandeliers were dim now, their crystals reflecting faint shards of moonlight. At the base of the stairs lay a small handkerchief embroidered with the initials E.H. Lila, picked it up. It smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something metallic, like old pennies. She slipped it into her apron pocket. Just then, she heard a soft sound. A note. A hum. It was coming from the piano. When she turned, Evelyn was there, sitting alone at the bench, her small hands gliding across the keys. It was not random. It was melody slow, haunting, beautiful. Lila's breath caught in her throat. "Evelyn," she whispered. "You can play." The child's fingers stopped. Her eyes lifted slowly toward Lila, and for a heartbeat, she smiled a small, knowing smile. Then, like a candle blown out, the light in her eyes vanished. She looked past Lila, toward the doorway. Mrs. Halden stood there, her expression unreadable. "Lila," she said softly, "it is late. Take your rest." Lila nodded, backing away. As she left, she saw Mrs. Halden kneel beside the piano, her hand gripping Evelyn's shoulder just a little too firmly. The sound of the piano lid closing echoed through the hall like a warning. That night, Lila lay awake in her small room near the kitchen, the sound of that final note still ringing in her ears. The girl was not mute. She was being silenced. And for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Lila felt a chill not from the cold, but from the truth pressing against her chest. She whispered into the dark, "I heard you, little one. I will not forget." Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, soft but steady, as if the house itself was trying to hush her. The following morning began with the kind of mist that clung to the mansion's windows like a secret that refused to lift. Lila woke early, the air cold enough that her breath fogged before her face as she tied her apron. The house was still half asleep, filled only with the soft clicks of distant heels and the hum of the furnace. As she passed the great hall, she noticed the grand piano was closed again, its polished surface gleaming as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But she knew what she had heard the night before. Evelyn's song had not been a dream. It had been real, and that knowledge sat in her chest like a pulse. When she entered the dining room, Mr. Halden was already seated at the table, scanning the morning newspaper. Mrs. Halden poured tea for him, her movements graceful and measured, every gesture rehearsed. Evelyn sat between them, silent, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, ma'am," Lila said softly. Mrs. Halden gave a polite nod, her eyes cool. Mr. Halden did not look up from his paper. Lila moved to clear the silver tray from the sideboard, her eyes flicking toward the little girl. Evelyn caught her gaze for a fleeting second, then looked down quickly, as if afraid. Beneath the table, Lila saw the child's hand move. She was drawing something on the linen napkin with her fingertips slow, deliberate letters forming a single word. Help. Lila froze. She nearly dropped the tray. Mrs. Halden's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Lila, is something wrong? No, ma'am, Lila said quickly. Just a little dizzy. She set the tray down and glanced back at the napkin, but the word was gone. Evelyn had folded it over, tucking it beneath her plate. The breakfast continued in tense silence. Afterward, when the family dispersed, Lila lingered to tidy the table. As she lifted the napkin, her breath caught again. A tiny crayon mark traced the edge of the fabric, the faint outline of the same 4 letters. Evelyn had written them again, only this time, hidden beneath the fold. Lila pressed the cloth between her fingers, her heart thudding. The girl was trying to communicate. Later that day, while Mrs. Halden was meeting with a decorator upstairs, Lila carried fresh linens to the nursery. Evelyn sat on the rug surrounded by books and toys, her expression distant. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting her face in fragile gold. Good afternoon, Miss Evelyn, Lila said softly. May I tidy your shelves? The girl did not respond, but as Lila bent to collect the books, she noticed one that had been placed upside down. Its cover showed a red bird in flight. When she lifted it, a folded paper slipped from between the pages. It was a drawing, done in childish strokes of blue and gray. A woman standing by a staircase, a little girl at her feet, and above them, a figure falling backward down the steps. Lila felt her pulse quicken. She knelt closer. Did you draw this? She asked quietly. Evelyn's eyes flicked up to hers, then to the closed door. Her lips parted just slightly, but no sound came out. She shook her head quickly, then pointed toward the paper, her small finger trembling. Lila understood. The drawing was not pretend. It was a memory. The sound of heels echoed suddenly from the hallway, and Evelyn's eyes widened in panic. Lila folded the paper fast and slipped it into her apron pocket just as Mrs. Halden entered. Lila, the woman said smoothly, I asked for new linens, not story time. Yes, ma'am, Lila murmured, standing. I was just finishing. Mrs. Halden smiled thinly and touched her daughter's shoulder. Sweetheart, play quietly while I speak with the driver. Evelyn nodded, gaze fixed on the floor. When Mrs. Halden left, Lila exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. She reached for her pocket, but before she could look at the paper again, she heard a faint sound behind her, a small mechanical click. She turned to see Evelyn holding a toy bear, its eyes blinking red. What is that? Lila whispered. The girl pressed the bear's paw. A tinny voice played from its chest, a recording, old and distorted but unmistakable. It was Evelyn's voice. Mommy hurt her. Lila's knees went weak. Who did she hurt, sweetheart? She whispered. But Evelyn shook her head violently and pressed the bear against her chest as if to protect it. Footsteps sounded again in the hall, heavy and fast. Lila straightened, just as Mrs. Halden reappeared. I will take it from here, she said curtly. Lila nodded, backing toward the door. The woman's smile did not reach her eyes. And Lila, she added, do not forget, curiosity is dangerous in this house. That night, in the quiet of her small room, Lila unfolded the paper and placed the bear beside it. The drawing of the woman falling down the stairs, the voice whispering from the toy, it was all connected. The memory Evelyn carried was not one of imagination. It was truth, hidden behind silence. As the wind brushed the windows again, Lila made a promise under her breath. I will find out what happened, she said softly, and I will help her speak. In the distance, thunder rolled, low and steady, as if the house itself was beginning to stir awake. That night the rain came down harder than usual, drumming against the tall windows of the Halden mansion and washing the city lights into blurred streaks beyond the glass. Lila waited until the house had gone still, until even the clock seemed to breathe quietly in the dark. Her small lamp cast a weak circle of light over her bed as she unfolded the crumpled drawing again. The woman on the staircase, the little girl watching it, was not a fantasy. The voice in the bear had confirmed it. Someone had been hurt in this house, and Evelyn had seen it happen. Lila slipped the folded paper into her pocket, put on her shawl, and stepped quietly into the hall. The mansion felt different at night. The grand portraits seemed to lean closer, their painted eyes following her steps. She moved past the library, past the music room, until she reached the east staircase, the one from Evelyn's drawing. The carpet there was a darker shade than the rest, newer, like it had been replaced recently. She ran her fingers along the banister. Halfway down, she found it, a faint crack in the wood, almost invisible unless you touched it. The edge was splintered, as if someone had fallen and grabbed it desperately before hitting the floor below. Lila's breath caught. She knelt and saw a small spot where the wood grain had been scrubbed clean. Beneath the polish was a faint brown stain, old but not forgotten. Footsteps echoed suddenly behind her, soft but deliberate. She turned, heart racing, and found herself staring at Mr. Halden. He was holding a glass of water, his robe loose, his face pale in the dim light. "Lila," he said quietly. "What are you doing here?" She straightened quickly, her hands trembling. I could not sleep, sir. I thought I heard something down here." His eyes lingered on the banister, then on her pocket. "You have something in your hand," he said. Lila hesitated, then unfolded the paper. "Sir," she whispered, "your daughter drew this." He took it gently, his brow furrowing as he looked at the image. "She said nothing," he murmured. "She cannot." "Sir," Lila said, her voice trembling but steady. "I think she can. I think she saw something. I found this by the piano, and she has a toy that speaks with her voice." It said. She stopped herself, unsure how much to reveal. Mr. Halden's face changed. He looked at the drawing again, then at the stairs. "It was an accident," he said after a moment, his tone more to himself than to her. "Years ago, the former housekeeper fell. The police ruled it an accident." "Did Evelyn see it happen?" Lila asked softly. His silence was answer enough. He looked up at her, something like shame flickering behind his tired eyes. "You should not get involved, Lila," he said finally. "There are things in this house that do not need to be remembered." He turned to leave, but she stepped forward, desperate. "Sir, your daughter is afraid. She is trying to speak. She needs someone to listen." For a moment, he paused. His shoulders sagged, and he whispered, "I have listened to silence for too long." Then he left her standing alone on the staircase. The next morning the air was thick and gray. Mrs. Halden was in the foyer when Lila arrived to dust the chandeliers. She looked immaculate as always, but her voice was colder than usual. "You were seen wandering the east wing last night," she said calmly. "Is that true?" Lila swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. I thought I heard a noise." "A noise," Mrs. Halden repeated softly, stepping closer. "The last thing this house needs is more noise. Remember your place, Lila. You are here to serve, not to snoop." "I understand, ma'am," Lila said. "Good." The woman's eyes lingered on her pocket for a heartbeat before she turned away. "Evelyn will be taking her lessons this afternoon. Do not disturb her." When Mrs. Halden left, Lila stood frozen for several seconds, her chest tight. She knew she was being watched, but she also knew she could not stop now. That afternoon she waited until the piano music drifted through the hallway, a soft, hesitant melody. She peeked into the music room. Evelyn sat at the bench, her small back straight, her fingers pressing the keys with care. The tutor, a gray-haired woman in pearls, corrected her posture gently. "Good," the tutor said. Again from the beginning. Lila noticed the bear on the floor beside the piano, its plastic eyes glinting. When the lesson ended, Evelyn looked up and saw her standing by the doorway. Lila smiled faintly and whispered. Later, by the garden, the girl nodded once, almost imperceptibly. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the iron gates, Lila waited near the rose bushes. Evelyn appeared, carrying the bear and the folded napkin from breakfast. She handed both to Lila without a word. Inside the napkin was a small photograph, faded, bent at the corners. It showed a woman with kind eyes, wearing an apron. Lila recognized her instantly from the staff records she had seen in the kitchen. The former housekeeper. "Is this who fell?" Lila asked softly. Evelyn nodded. "Was she your friend?" The child's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand against her throat, as if trying to pull the words out. Her lips moved once more, silent but clear. Lila read them easily. She saved me. The wind rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of rain and roses. Lila knelt beside the little girl and whispered, "Then I will save you too." Somewhere inside the mansion, a light flickered behind the curtains, and for the first time Lila wondered who else had been watching from the shadows. That night the air in the mansion felt heavier than before, thick with the kind of silence that carries warning. Lila could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evelyn's small face in the fading light of the garden, the words she had mouthed still echoing inside her mind. She saved me. The image of the old photograph burned behind her eyelids, the kind woman in the apron who had once worked here, the woman who had fallen down those stairs. Lila rose quietly from her bed and looked out the narrow window above the servant quarters. The rain had stopped, and the world outside shimmered with damp silver. She made a decision then. She would not leave this house without bringing the truth to light. The following morning began as always. Polished and precise. The staff moved like clockwork, breakfast trays, fresh flowers, folded napkins. But the rhythm of the house had changed. There was tension in the air, a stiffness in every voice. Mr. Halden sat at the table, a cup of coffee untouched in front of him, his eyes lost somewhere beyond the headlines of his newspaper. Mrs. Halden stood beside the window, speaking in hushed tones to a man in a dark suit, her lawyer, perhaps. Lila moved carefully through the room, serving quietly, but her thoughts raced beneath her calm face. She noticed how Evelyn sat further from her mother than usual, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When Mrs. Halden reached to pour juice into her daughter's glass, Evelyn flinched so slightly that only Lila noticed. That single motion confirmed everything. After breakfast, Mr. Halden rose to leave for his office. Before he stepped out, he paused beside Lila. His voice was low. "You have something you wish to say?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "Sir, it is about your daughter. I believe she needs help beyond this house." He looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Be careful what you say, Lila. You are walking a thin line." "Sir," she said firmly. The line was drawn by silence, not by truth. His eyes softened for just a heartbeat before he turned away and left. That afternoon the sky dimmed early, the clouds rolling in thick and gray. Lila waited until Mrs. Halden left for her charity luncheon before she climbed the back staircase to Evelyn's room. The child sat by the window with her bear, staring at the garden below. When she saw Lila, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that looked more like relief than joy. Lila sat beside her. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "would you like to go outside for a while? Just to the park?" Evelyn's eyes widened in surprise, then she nodded quickly. "Good," Lila said softly. "We will go now, before anyone returns." She wrapped the girl's small coat around her shoulders, tucked the bear under her arm, and led her quietly down the back stairwell. The rain had left the air crisp, and the scent of wet earth filled their lungs as they stepped outside for the first time in weeks. The park was only a short walk from the mansion gates, but for Evelyn it felt like another world. She looked around with wonder, her eyes catching the way sunlight glimmered through the leaves. Lila sat her on a bench near the pond. "You are safe here," she said gently. Evelyn ran her fingers along the wooden slats of the bench, then pointed at the water where a duck glided past. For a moment, she was just a child again. "Do you come here often?" Lila asked softly. The girl shook her head. "No?" Lila smiled sadly. "I did not think so. It is a good place to breathe." A man passing by nodded politely to them, tipping his hat. Lila felt the tension in her chest ease slightly, but it did not last long. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a black car parked near the edge of the park. The tinted window lowered, and for a brief second she saw the outline of Mrs. Halden's face, cold, expressionless, watching. Panic fluttered in her chest. She stood quickly and said, "Come, sweetheart, we should go back." Evelyn's hand tightened around hers, not in fear, but in trust. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Halden was waiting by the door, her posture perfectly still, her eyes sharp. "Where have you been?" she asked. Lila bowed her head slightly. I only took her for a walk, ma'am. The fresh air. You took her without permission." Mrs. Halden's voice remained calm, but every syllable was edged like glass. "That will be all for today, Lila. You may collect your wages. You are dismissed." Lila's breath caught. "Ma'am, please. I said you are dismissed." Lila wanted to protest, to tell her everything she knew, but Evelyn stood behind her mother, eyes wide with silent terror. If she spoke now, the child might suffer more, so she nodded, forcing her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am." That evening, Lila packed her small suitcase in the servants' quarters. As she folded her uniform, something fell from her pocket, the drawing of the woman on the staircase. She stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into her coat. She would not walk away. She would find a way back inside. Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping through the trees, rattling the window panes as if urging her onward. As she stepped out into the cold night, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I will return. I will not leave her in silence." And somewhere inside the mansion, behind the glass of an upstairs window, Evelyn pressed her small hand against the pane, watching the only person who had ever listened disappear into the dark. The next few days were clouded in uncertainty. Lila had left the mansion, but the sense of unfinished business gnawed at her, a sharp ache that grew with each passing hour. The streets of the city, normally a refuge of busy lives, now felt cold and empty. She walked aimlessly, her mind consumed by the silence she had left behind. What had she accomplished? Nothing yet. She had exposed a hint of truth, but there was still so much more buried in that house. Evelyn was still trapped in a web of silence, bound by the lies that others had created for her. Lila couldn't walk away from that. She found herself standing before the mansion once more, though she hadn't intended to return. The towering gates loomed before her, casting long shadows in the pale morning light. The moment she reached for the door, she felt it, a presence behind her. She turned slowly, her heart pounding. It was Mr. Halden. His face was tired, drawn, as if sleep had not come to him for days. His usual stern demeanor had softened, replaced with something else: uncertainty, maybe guilt. "Lila," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you." He motioned for her to follow him as he stepped toward the side gate, away from the grand entrance. The servants' quarters were nearby, but he led her down a narrow, dimly lit path between the hedges. "I don't have much time," he continued, "but I want you to know something." Lila waited, her breath caught in her throat. This was unexpected. The man who had kept his distance from her, from everyone, was now seeking her out. "Evelyn," he began, "she has been speaking more. Not in words, but in other ways." He stopped and turned to face her, his eyes filled with concern. The piano, the drawing, those were not just things she imagined. "I thought I could protect her from the world, but I was wrong." Lila's heart skipped a beat. "She has been trying to communicate," he added softly, "and I've ignored it. I've allowed her silence to grow, thinking it was for the best. But now," his voice trailed off, as if he couldn't find the words to finish the thought. Lila stepped closer, her eyes wide. "What do you want from me, sir?" He glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. "I want you to help her. I want you to make her speak. To tell the truth." Lila could feel the weight of the request, the burden of it. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of it hit her all at once. The Halden family had built their life on appearances, on control, on silence. And now, Mr. Halden was asking her to shatter that. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What really happened to the housekeeper?" Mr. Halden closed his eyes and let out a long breath. "It was a mistake. She was never supposed to fall. She was trying to protect Evelyn. The stairs, they were too steep, too slick, but she pushed Evelyn out of the way." His voice cracked. "I should have done something, but I didn't. I just watched as it happened. And when it was over, I told myself it was just an accident. But Evelyn saw it all. She knows what happened. She has known from the start." Lila's chest tightened as she listened. "So you've been keeping this secret all this time?" she asked. "Yes," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't want to face the truth. I didn't want to lose everything I've worked for. But now I see that I have already lost it all. My daughter is suffering, and I've done nothing to help her." Lila nodded slowly, taking in his words. "You've already taken the first step, sir. Now you need to let Evelyn speak. Let her be heard." Mr. Halden looked at her, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I don't know how to make her speak," he admitted. "But I know you can. You've seen the signs. You've been listening to her when no one else would. Please, help her." Lila paused, her mind racing. She had wanted to walk away, to leave the mansion and forget what she had seen. But now, standing in front of the man who had created this cage of silence, she knew there was no going back. She had to be the one to break it open. "I will help her," she said, her voice steady, even though doubt still lingered in the pit of her stomach. "But it will take more than just asking. Evelyn needs to feel safe. She needs to trust that you won't push her back into silence again." Mr. Halden nodded, his expression solemn. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." As they stood there, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees above them. The sound was like a quiet promise, a whisper that carried the weight of all that had been hidden. "We will do it together," Lila said. "But it has to be done slowly. She has to feel like it's her choice, not something forced upon her." Mr. Halden looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. Lila turned to leave, but then paused. She glanced back at him. "Sir," she said softly, "if Evelyn chooses to speak the truth, she will need your support. You can't walk away from her again." He stood there, watching her, as if the weight of her words had truly sunk in for the first time. Lila left the mansion that day, but something inside her had shifted. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the path would be difficult. But she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a servant in that house. She was Evelyn's voice, and she would make sure it was heard. The next morning was different. The heavy gray clouds had finally broken, letting soft sunlight spill over the grounds of the mansion. But the warmth from the sun could not reach the cool space inside Lila's heart. She had agreed to help Evelyn, but the weight of that decision pressed down on her as she made her way to the mansion's back entrance. The silence that had clung to this place for so long was still there, thick in the air, but something else lingered now: hope. Hope that Evelyn's voice could be heard. She had barely entered the house when she was greeted by the familiar, cold smile of Mrs. Halden. "You're back," Mrs. Halden said, her tone cool but not surprised. "Where is my daughter?" "She's upstairs, ma'am," Lila replied, keeping her voice steady. "I will take her lessons in the music room." Mrs. Halden nodded. "See that you do," she said before turning away. Lila's heart sank. Mrs. Halden had no idea what was coming. She would have no control over what was about to unfold. Lila made her way up the stairs, her shoes clicking quietly on the marble floor. She passed by the rooms that were always so pristine, so perfectly curated. But today, they felt like tombs, empty spaces, waiting to be filled with truth. When she reached Evelyn's door, she knocked softly before entering. The room was filled with sunlight, the curtains drawn back to let the light wash over the space. Evelyn sat by the window, staring out at the garden, the same way she had on the day Lila first met her. When she heard the door open, she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She already knew who it was. "Lila," she whispered, her voice so soft that Lila almost didn't hear it. "I'm here," Lila replied, her voice just as quiet. She sat beside the girl and placed her hand gently on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" Evelyn nodded, her eyes still fixed on the garden. Lila had been working with her for days now, trying to teach her how to express what she had kept hidden for so long. But today, Lila could sense that something was different. Evelyn was ready. "You know," Lila said softly, "you don't have to be afraid anymore. You've already spoken in so many ways." Evelyn turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting Lila's. "I want to speak," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "I want to tell them the truth." Lila smiled gently. "You will. We will do it together." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the moment settling around them. Evelyn's fingers twitched, as if she were holding something back. I remember it," Evelyn said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I remember the fall. I remember her face. I remember the blood." Lila's heart tightened. She had known it would be painful, but hearing the words come from Evelyn's lips made it real. The truth was finally starting to come out. "What happened, Evelyn?" Lila asked softly, her voice full of encouragement. "I was playing by the stairs," Evelyn continued, her voice trembling. She came to me, pushed me out of the way. I didn't understand why. And then she fell. She fell, and I screamed, but nobody came." The tears started to well up in Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them away. "I was just a little girl. I didn't know what to do. I thought I had done something wrong. I thought it was my fault." Lila's heart broke for her. She reached over and took the child's hand in hers. "It wasn't your fault, Evelyn. You did nothing wrong. You were just a child, and you were scared." Evelyn looked down at her hands, her small fingers trembling in Lila's grip. "But my mother," she said it was an accident. She said it was all a mistake. "Your mother wasn't telling the truth," Lila said gently. "She was trying to protect herself, to protect the family's reputation. But that's not the truth. The truth is what you saw, and you are strong enough to speak it now." Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes determined. She squeezed Lila's hand tightly. "I want to tell my father," she said, her voice firm. "I want to tell him what happened. I want him to know the truth, too." Lila smiled, feeling a wave of pride swell in her chest. "You're ready," she said. "We'll tell him together. You're not alone." Together, they left the room and made their way down the hallway, past the grand staircase, and into the library where Mr. Halden often worked. He was there, sitting behind his large oak desk, papers spread out in front of him. When he saw them, his eyes softened. "Evelyn," he said gently, "you're here. What is it you need?" Evelyn took a deep breath, her hands still trembling, but her voice steady. "Father," she said, her voice clear, "I remember what happened to the housekeeper. I saw it. It wasn't an accident. She saved me, but she fell, and I never told you because I was too scared." Mr. Halden's face drained of color. He stood up quickly, knocking the papers on his desk to the floor. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. But Evelyn stood her ground, her eyes meeting his with determination. "It's the truth, Father. Please, stop hiding from it." Lila stood behind her, her heart pounding. She had never seen Evelyn so strong, so certain. Mr. B. Halden stepped back, his face a mixture of shock and sorrow. "I never wanted you to know," he said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted you to live with that. But I have lived with it," Evelyn said, her voice breaking now. "And so have you." The room fell silent, the weight of the truth heavy between them. Finally, Mr. Halden lowered his head, as if in defeat. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn," he said quietly. "I should have done something. I should have protected you." Evelyn took a step forward and placed her hand on her father's arm. "You can protect me now," she said softly. "We can make it right." Lila watched as father and daughter stood there together, a fragile bridge beginning to form between them. She had done what she had promised. She had helped Evelyn speak. The silence was finally broken. Ivy Hill was quiet in the days that followed the revelation. The house, once a place of constant bustle, now felt like it was holding its breath, as if waiting for something. Lila had hoped that the truth would free Evelyn, that it would bring peace. But the weight of the secret still hung heavily in the halls, and Evelyn's silence was no longer a shield, but a raw wound. The girl spent her days sitting by the window, her hands wringing the fabric of her dress, eyes staring out at the garden. Her parents barely spoke to her, their voices filled with guilt, regret, and fear. And Evelyn, for the first time, felt the full weight of what had been kept from her for so long. Lila knew this was only the beginning. She had helped Evelyn speak, but now she had to help her find the strength to heal. That evening, after dinner, Lila went to the garden to clear her head. The flowers, still damp from the earlier rain, filled the air with their scent. She sat on the stone bench, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the perfectly manicured grounds. She wasn't sure what had brought her back to this house, or why she hadn't just walked away. She had hoped to be done with this place, to let the truth stand for itself, but she knew it wasn't enough. The house had taken something from Evelyn. It had taken her voice, her trust, her innocence. And now, it was up to Lila to help her find them again. She stood, shaking off the weight of her thoughts, and started walking toward the back door of the house. As she reached for the handle, the door opened from the inside. Mr. Halden stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Lila," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I need to speak with you." Lila looked at him, unsure of what to expect. He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "What's going on?" Lila asked softly as she stepped inside. Mr. Halden shut the door behind her, then took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began, looking down at the floor. "About helping Evelyn. I haven't done enough. I thought I could protect her by keeping her in silence, but all I've done is made things worse." He paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "I need to help her now. I need to fix this." Lila nodded slowly, watching him carefully. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I don't know how to make things right," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I do know that I can't do it alone. I need you to help me. I need you to help Evelyn find her voice again." Lila felt her heart tighten at his words. "You can't fix this by yourself," she said softly. "Evelyn needs more than just apologies. She needs time, trust, and patience. She needs to know that you're not going to hide from her anymore." Mr. Halden's eyes filled with guilt as he looked at her. "I know. I've failed her. I've failed both of you." Lila placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him a small, comforting smile. "It's not too late," she said gently. "But it will take time." The next few days were a blur of small changes. Mr. Halden took the first step by talking openly with Evelyn. He apologized to her, told her that he was sorry for everything he had kept from her, for the lies, for the silence. He told her that he would never hide anything from her again. And slowly, Evelyn began to trust him again. She started speaking more, though her words were hesitant, broken, like a flower trying to bloom after a long winter. But she spoke, and with every word, the silence in the house started to fade, replaced by something else, something that felt like hope, but it wasn't easy. There were moments when Evelyn would fall silent again, retreating into herself, too afraid to speak. There were days when Lila wasn't sure if she was helping or just making things worse. But each time Evelyn spoke, each time she took a step forward, Lila knew they were moving in the right direction. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Lila found Evelyn sitting alone on the steps of the front porch, staring out at the horizon. The garden around them was quiet, the world still, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Lila sat beside her, offering a gentle smile. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. Finally, after a long moment of silence, she whispered, "I'm scared." Lila's heart ached for her. She reached out, placing a hand on Evelyn's. "It's okay to be scared," she said softly, "but you don't have to face it alone anymore." Evelyn looked up at her, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to be silent anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I want to speak, but I don't know how." Lila squeezed her hand gently. "You've already started, Evelyn. You've already spoken the truth. That's the hardest part." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, letting the quiet wash over them. But this silence was different. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of something new, something that had not been there before. It was the silence before the next step. "You're not alone," Lila said softly. "I'll be here with you every step of the way." Evelyn nodded, her face softening. For the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. It was small, tentative, but it was a smile, and in that moment, Lila knew they were both moving toward something brighter. Together, they would find the voice Evelyn had been hiding for so long, and nothing would silence it again. The days that followed were a slow but steady progression toward healing. Evelyn began to speak more openly, her words often hesitant at first, but gradually gaining strength as she realized the truth could be spoken, that it would be heard. Lila continued to stand by her, offering gentle encouragement, allowing the girl to find her own pace in the process. Despite the small victories, there was an undercurrent of unease that lingered in the house. Mr. Halden had taken responsibility for his actions, but his words, though meaningful, couldn't erase the years of silence that had built walls between him and his daughter. He was trying, but Evelyn still carried the weight of everything that had been hidden. One morning, a week after their breakthrough conversation, Lila woke early to find that the house was unusually quiet. The usual sounds of servants preparing breakfast and the soft hum of conversation were absent. She made her way to the kitchen, only to find the staff gathered together, their faces tense. The head housekeeper, Ruth, looked up when Lila entered, her expression strained. "Lila," she said softly, "there's something you need to see." Lila followed Ruth through the kitchen, down the long hallway that led to the family's private quarters. At the far end of the hall was a door Lila had never noticed before. It was partially ajar, and as they drew closer, Lila could hear the faint sound of voices. She paused, her heart beginning to race. Ruth opened the door slowly, revealing Mr. Halden and Mrs. Halden standing near the window, speaking in low tones. Evelyn was not present. The conversation between the two was tense, filled with words that Lila could not make out clearly, but the anger and frustration in their voices were palpable. "They're making arrangements," Ruth whispered. "They've called someone from outside." Lila's stomach tightened. "What kind of arrangements?" Ruth's eyes flickered toward the door. "They're going to send Evelyn away, to a special place, somewhere she can get help." The words hit Lila like a cold wave. She had just begun to break through the barriers Evelyn had built around herself, and now they wanted to send her away? "Why?" Lila whispered. Her voice filled with disbelief. Ruth shook her head, her face drawn. "They think it's the best thing. They believe she needs professional help. They want to put her in a place where she can be treated, like a patient." Lila's heart sank. She had been so focused on helping Evelyn find her voice, but now it seemed like they were about to take that opportunity away. The sound of a door opening interrupted her thoughts. Mr. Halden stepped into the hallway, his face pale, his eyes avoiding hers. "Lila," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you." Lila stood still for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing panic inside her. Mr. Halden looked down, clearly struggling. "I've spoken to the doctors. They recommend a facility for Evelyn. They think it will be good for her healing." Lila's chest tightened, her hands shaking as she held herself together. "What do you mean by healing?" she asked, her voice strained. "She's already healing. She's speaking. It's not enough," Mr. Halden interrupted, his voice edged with frustration. "She's not getting better here. She needs more than what we can give her. She needs to be in a place where they can treat her properly." Lila stepped closer to him, her heart racing. "You're talking about sending her away, after everything we've worked for?" Mr. Halden's expression faltered. "I'm trying to do what's best for her." Lila's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Evelyn doesn't need a place where they will lock her away. She needs her family. She needs you." Mr. Halden's shoulders slumped as if the weight of her words had finally landed. "I don't know what else to do, Lila. I don't know how to fix it." "You don't fix it by hiding her away," Lila said, her voice soft but firm. "You fix it by being there for her, by showing her that you won't abandon her again." Mr. Halden stood silently for a moment, the words sinking in. Then, with a deep sigh, he nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've been wrong. I don't know what I was thinking." Lila reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. "It's not too late to make things right." She paused, watching his face closely. "But you need to let Evelyn make the decision. She needs to be in control of her own future. She's the one who's been silent for so long. She deserves the chance to choose." He looked at her, his expression torn. "But what if she chooses wrong? What if she can't cope?" Lila shook her head. "She'll find her way, but you have to trust her. You have to trust that she's stronger than you think." Mr. Halden's eyes softened, and for the first time, Lila saw the guilt lift slightly from his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve your help, but I'll try. I'll do whatever it takes to help her." Lila nodded, a sense of relief flooding her chest. "You're doing it already," she said softly. Over the next few days, things began to change. The talk of sending Evelyn away stopped. Mr. Halden took it upon himself to sit down with his daughter, to listen to her words and let her express what she needed. He found ways to make her feel safe, not as a patient to be treated, but as a daughter to be understood. Lila continued to stand by them, guiding Evelyn with her quiet strength, helping her navigate the difficult road ahead. Slowly, the walls that had once separated them all began to crumble. It wasn't an easy journey. There were moments when Evelyn withdrew, when the fear of speaking too much seemed overwhelming. But with Lila's support, and with her father's newfound commitment to help, Evelyn started to find her voice, not as a patient or a victim, but as a person who had the power to choose her own path. And as the days turned into weeks, the silence in Ivy Hill began to fade, replaced by a new sound, the sound of a family healing together. The days turned into weeks, and the house at Ivy Hill gradually became a different place. The oppressive silence that once filled the mansion was replaced by an air of tentative hope, the kind of quiet that comes when people are learning to speak their truths. Evelyn, once withdrawn and fearful of her own voice, began to open up more, her words flowing more freely each day. She would sit with Lila in the mornings, the two of them working together on small projects, the quiet conversations they shared becoming a new kind of normal. Mr. Halden, having finally accepted the full weight of his daughter's suffering, was committed to the process of rebuilding their relationship. He spent hours with her, listening to her, letting her express her fears and her hopes. At first, it was difficult for him to sit with the discomfort of hearing about the past, but as the days went by, he grew more patient, more present. One afternoon, after a long conversation with Evelyn, he stood in the library, looking out over the garden, his thoughts clouded with the weight of the past. Lila entered quietly, not wanting to disturb his moment of contemplation, but he turned to her when he sensed her presence. "Lila," he said, his voice rough, "thank you for everything. You've helped me see the truth. You've helped me see Evelyn in a way I never did before." Lila stood in the doorway, her hands folded in front of her. "You've done the hard work, Mr. Halden. You've started to listen. That's the first step. Now it's up to you and Evelyn to keep walking this path together." He nodded, his gaze softening. "I know. I didn't realize how much I had ignored, how much I had let slip away. I was so focused on the world outside this house that I forgot the most important thing inside it, my daughter, my family." Lila smiled faintly. "It's not too late. You have time." As the weeks went on, Evelyn's voice continued to grow stronger. She began to share memories she had kept locked away for so long, pieces of the past she had been too afraid to confront. She spoke of her fears, of the fall, of the guilt she carried for not being able to protect the housekeeper, for thinking it was her fault. Each time she spoke, a layer of the silence that had trapped her seemed to fall away. But it was not a smooth journey. There were days when she retreated into herself again, afraid of what would happen if she let her voice be heard. There were nights when she would wake from nightmares, her eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in short gasps. But every time, Lila was there to comfort her, to remind her that it was okay to be scared, that it was okay to take it slow. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lila and Evelyn sat in the garden, their feet bare against the cool grass. Evelyn was quieter than usual, her hands nervously twisting the hem of her dress. "Lila," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "I'm afraid." Lila turned to her, her expression gentle. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. Evelyn looked up, her eyes full of uncertainty. "I'm afraid that when I speak too much, I'll lose everything. That I'll make things worse." Lila reached out, placing a hand over hers. "Evelyn, you don't have to say everything all at once. And you don't have to carry this alone anymore. You've already taken the hardest step. Speaking is scary, but it's also powerful. You don't lose anything by telling the truth. You gain yourself." Evelyn nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered. Lila smiled softly, wiping the tear away. "You don't have to be afraid, sweetheart. You've already shown so much courage. You'll keep finding your voice. You'll keep growing stronger." As the evening drew on, they sat together in the fading light, their silence comfortable, a quiet understanding passing between them. The world around them seemed to fall away, and for a brief moment, it felt like the weight of the past had finally been lifted. But there was still much to be done. They would continue to move forward, one step at a time, allowing Evelyn to speak when she was ready, allowing her to heal at her own pace. In the days that followed, Mr. Halden kept his promise to be there for his daughter, to support her as she found her way. The family began to spend more time together, not just in the formal spaces of the mansion, but in the quiet corners, the places where real conversations could take place. They talked, they listened, they learned. And with each passing day, the walls between them continued to fall, brick by brick. One afternoon, as Evelyn sat at the piano, playing a gentle melody, Mr. Dew, Halden and Lila stood in the doorway, watching her. She had come so far in such a short time. The girl who had once been too afraid to speak was now playing the music of her soul, letting the notes fill the room with their quiet beauty. Mr. Halden looked at Lila, his eyes filled with gratitude. "She's not the same girl who came into this house," he said softly. Lila smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "No, she's stronger than she knows." And as they stood there, watching Evelyn play, they knew that the road ahead would not be without its challenges, but they also knew that they would face them together. The silence that had once ruled their lives was gone, replaced by the sound of a family learning to speak, learning to listen, learning to love again. The sun rose gently over Ivy Hill the next morning, casting a soft light on the mansion as the family moved through another day of quiet transformation. Evelyn was no longer the withdrawn girl who had once hidden behind silence. She was slowly becoming someone who was not defined by her past fears, but by her strength and her voice. It had not been an easy journey, and there were still moments when the weight of everything would fall upon her. But she was learning to speak, to trust, and to heal. As the days passed, Evelyn and her father spent more time together, a routine settling into place where they could sit without words, knowing that they were building something stronger than they had ever had before, a foundation of trust. Mr. Halden continued to do his part, staying present in a way he had never done before. He would sit with her in the garden, or by the piano, simply listening, never pushing. Evelyn's trust in him grew every day, and with it, a small smile would light up her face. One afternoon, Lila found herself in the kitchen, preparing the evening meal when Ruth approached her quietly. "Lila," Ruth said softly, her expression serious, "I think it's time for you to hear what Evelyn's been working on." Lila raised an eyebrow, curious. Ruth smiled faintly. "She's been writing, not just in her mind, but with her hands." Lila's heart quickened. Evelyn had always been quiet about her feelings, but now, it seemed as though she was opening up in a way Lila hadn't expected. "Writing?" Lila asked, following Ruth to the small writing desk in the corner of the kitchen. Ruth handed her a small notebook, its pages worn with use. "She started this after the music lessons," Ruth explained. "She's been putting down her thoughts, her dreams. She hasn't shared it with anyone yet, but I think she's ready." Lila opened the notebook, her eyes scanning the delicate handwriting. The words were a mixture of memories and hopes, fragments of a young girl's heart that had been locked away for so long. The more she read, the more she could see how much Evelyn had been carrying alone. It was heartbreaking, yet beautiful. "She's writing about the fall, about what happened," Lila said softly, tracing the words with her finger. Ruth nodded. "She's telling her story, and she's ready to face it." Lila sat back, feeling the weight of the moment. "I think she's ready for the next step." That evening, after dinner, Lila took Evelyn outside, to the quiet bench in the garden where they had first begun to talk. The sun was setting, and the air was cool and calm. Evelyn had grown more comfortable in her own skin, but there were still times when the past would catch up to her, like the shadows lengthening as the day faded. Lila could sense it. "Evelyn," Lila said gently, "I think it's time to share what you've written." Evelyn looked at her, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Do you think they'll understand?" she asked quietly. "They will," Lila said, her voice full of assurance. "They need to hear your truth." Evelyn's fingers twisted nervously around the edge of her dress, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready to say it out loud." Lila smiled softly, her heart aching for the girl in front of her. "It's okay to be scared. But your voice matters, Evelyn. It's time for you to take the next step." The two of them sat in silence for a few moments before Evelyn slowly stood, her hands trembling. She took a deep breath, the weight of her decision settling over her. "I'll do it," she said softly. Lila stood beside her hand resting on her shoulder for reassurance. "I'm here with you." They made their way back inside, to the parlor where Mr. Halden and Mrs. Halden were sitting. The tension in the room was palpable, but when Evelyn entered, all eyes turned to her. "Father," Evelyn said, her voice small but clear, "I have something to say." Mr. Halden looked at her, his face unreadable. His wife sat quietly beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I've been writing," she began, her voice shaking slightly but growing steadier with each word. "I've been writing about the fall, about what happened, and I want to tell you what I remember." Mr. Halden's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, he truly saw his daughter. He nodded, encouraging her silently to continue. "It wasn't an accident," Evelyn said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "I saw her fall. I saw her push me out of the way, and she saved me. But she—" Evelyn stopped, taking a deep breath. "She died, and I never told anyone. I was too scared. I thought it was my fault." Mrs. Halden's face shifted, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her features. Lila watched, her heart pounding in her chest. "Evelyn," Mr. Halden said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't need to carry that alone anymore. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you. I didn't understand. But I do now. I see you, and I hear you." Evelyn looked at her father, her eyes wide with relief. The tension that had built up over years began to unravel. She wasn't just speaking to the room, she was speaking to him, to her father, and for the first time, she felt truly heard. Lila stood quietly in the background, watching as father and daughter shared a moment of raw connection. The truth had come out, and with it, a sense of freedom. It wasn't the end of the healing process, but it was a significant step forward. Evelyn had found her voice. And now, it was time for her to reclaim her place in the world. The silence that had once weighed so heavily on her heart was gone. She had spoken the truth, and for the first time, the air in Ivy Hill felt lighter, as if a new chapter was about to begin. The days that followed Evelyn's revelation were not easy, but they were filled with progress. The weight of the truth had been lifted, but the scars remained, and healing is never a straight path. Yet, as time passed, there was an undeniable change in the atmosphere of Ivy Hill. The once cold, distant mansion was now filled with warmth, and the silence that had once suffocated the family was slowly being replaced by conversation, laughter, and understanding. Evelyn had found her voice, but now it was time for her to learn how to use it. Not just in moments of pain, but in everyday life. She began to open up more, sharing her thoughts and feelings with her father, with Lila, with Ruth, and even Mrs. Halden, who, though still distant, had begun to soften in her own way. The change was slow, but it was there. Mr. Halden, having watched his daughter struggle for so long, was determined not to let her face the world alone anymore. He spent hours with Evelyn, teaching her to trust him, showing her that he was there for her in every way he could be. He was patient, giving her the space to speak when she was ready, and holding her hand when she needed it most. Mrs. Halden, too, was beginning to change, though it was clear that her journey would take more time. She still struggled with the weight of her own guilt, but she had started to listen more, to engage with Evelyn and Mr. Halden in a way she never had before. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, something shifted. It wasn't anything dramatic, but the way they interacted was different. There was no tension in the air, no coldness between them. They talked, they laughed. For the first time in years, they felt like a family again. Evelyn, who had once been silent and withdrawn, now spoke freely, sharing her thoughts on the meal, the weather, her day. She had begun to look forward to these moments, moments where she wasn't afraid to speak, where she was simply allowed to exist. After dinner, Mr. Halden suggested they take a walk in the garden, a simple, peaceful activity that had become a new tradition for them. The sun was setting, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The air was cool, but not cold, a perfect evening to reflect on how far they had come. As they walked along the path, Evelyn slowed down, pulling her father aside gently. "Dad," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I want to thank you for being there for me, for listening. I didn't think you would ever understand. But now I feel like I can breathe again." Mr. Halden smiled, his eyes filled with emotion. "You've always been able to breathe, Evelyn," he said softly. "I just couldn't hear your voice until now." They stood there for a moment, the world around them fading into the background as they shared a quiet, powerful moment of connection. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't complete, but it was a beginning of trust, of healing, of hope. As the evening wore on, Lila watched them from a distance, her heart full. She had known that Evelyn had the strength to heal, but seeing it happen, seeing the change unfold before her eyes, was something she had never imagined. Evelyn wasn't just speaking, she was living again, and that, she realized, was the true victory. It wasn't just about finding her voice, it was about reclaiming her life. Over the following weeks, the family continued to grow stronger. They spent more time together, not just in the grand rooms of the mansion, but in the small, intimate spaces where real conversations could happen. They talked about everything, the past, the future, their dreams and fears. They listened to each other in a way they never had before. One day, Evelyn asked Lila if they could take a trip into town. She had been talking about wanting to see more of the world outside the walls of Ivy Hill, to experience life beyond the mansion. It had been a simple request, but it meant so much. For Evelyn to want to explore the world again, to take a step forward into something new, this was the beginning of her true healing. Lila agreed, and the two of them spent the day walking through the small shops, talking, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company. For the first time, Evelyn seemed completely at ease, no longer burdened by the silence or the weight of the past. They stopped for ice cream, sitting on a bench by the river, watching the boats go by. "This is nice," Evelyn said, her voice light, her smile genuine. "I feel free." Lila smiled back. "You are free," she said, "and you always have been." As they made their way back to the mansion later that day, Evelyn's heart was lighter than it had ever been. The world felt bigger now, full of possibilities. She was no longer trapped by her silence, no longer held back by fear. She had found her voice, and with it, she had found herself. When they returned home, Mr. Halden was waiting for them, a warm smile on his face. "How was the trip?" he asked. Evelyn grinned. "It was amazing," she said, her voice full of excitement. "I feel like I can do anything now." Mr. Halden's heart swelled with pride. "You can," he said softly. "You always could." And in that moment, he knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The past could never be erased, but it no longer defined them. The silence had been broken, and in its place, a new beginning had been born. Weeks passed, and with each day, Ivy Hill seemed to grow more alive, more full of possibility. The once empty hallways now echoed with laughter and conversation, and the house, which had once felt like a prison, had become a place of comfort and connection. Evelyn continued to blossom, her voice now a natural part of their daily life. She no longer shied away from conversations or avoided being in the spotlight. She had learned to stand tall, to speak her truth, and most importantly, to embrace her place in the world. Lila watched as Evelyn flourished, a quiet pride swelling in her chest. She had been there from the beginning, when Evelyn could barely speak a word, when her fears and silence were the walls that kept her from living. Now, Evelyn was taking steps toward a future that was bright and full of potential. But healing was not a linear path. There were still days when Evelyn would retreat into herself, when the past would come rushing back in overwhelming waves. It was on one of those days that Lila found her, sitting by the window in the quiet room where Evelyn had spent so many hours in silence. The girl was staring out at the garden, her fingers absently tracing the glass. Lila sat down beside her, her presence a quiet reassurance. "Evelyn," Lila said softly, "what's on your mind?" Evelyn turned to her, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready to let go of everything," she said in a barely audible voice. "The past still feels so close, like I'm still stuck in it sometimes." Lila reached out, gently resting her hand on Evelyn's. "You're not stuck, Evelyn," she said, her voice calm and warm. "It's okay to feel that way. Healing takes time, and sometimes the past doesn't let go all at once. But every day, you're moving forward." Evelyn looked at Lila, her gaze searching for something. But what if I can't move forward? What if it's too much? Lila smiled, a gentle, encouraging smile. You've already come so far, Evelyn. You're stronger than you think. You've already faced your fears. You've spoken your truth. And you have people here who love you, who want to help you every step of the way. Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I don't want to be afraid anymore, she whispered. Lila squeezed her hand. You're not alone. You don't have to do this by yourself. They sat together for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. I want to keep moving forward, she said softly, but I'm still afraid. Lila nodded, understanding the depth of her fear. It's okay to be afraid, she said. Fear doesn't go away overnight, but it doesn't have to control you either. You have the power to face it, and you've already started doing that. Evelyn smiled faintly. The first true smile in days. I don't want to be stuck anymore. Lila's heart swelled with pride. You won't be. You're already on your way. The following days brought new challenges, but also new triumphs. Evelyn continued to speak more freely, her confidence growing. She began to express her feelings more openly, not just about the past, but about her hopes for the future. She spoke about her dreams, about wanting to help others, about finding a way to make a difference. As she spoke, Lila could see the shift. Evelyn was no longer the frightened, withdrawn girl she had once been. She was a young woman with a voice, with agency, with a future ahead of her. One afternoon, as Evelyn sat in the garden sketching, Lila noticed how much she had changed. The girl who had once been afraid to speak was now actively shaping her own life, choosing to move forward with courage. It was then that Lila realized how much they had both grown, how much they had both healed. Evelyn's journey wasn't over, but it was no longer defined by fear or silence. And that, Lila knew, was a victory in itself. The healing process continued, but now it felt less like a battle and more like a journey, one that Evelyn was walking with strength and grace. And in that journey, Lila would continue to walk alongside her, offering her support, her friendship, and her unwavering belief in her. Together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that they had already conquered the hardest part, breaking the silence. The weeks that followed were filled with small victories and quiet moments of progress. Ivy Hill had become a place of calm and peace, a stark contrast to the tension and silence that had once gripped it. Evelyn had found her voice, and with it, a newfound sense of freedom. She no longer tiptoed around her fears. She faced them head on, speaking when she needed to, trusting when she could, and beginning to heal in ways that Lila had never imagined. The mansion had become a home again. The once cold, distant halls were now filled with the warmth of conversations, shared laughter, and even tears. Mr. Halden continued to stay by his daughter's side, offering his unwavering support. He still had his moments of doubt, but he had grown in ways that made him a better father to Evelyn, and in turn, a better man. He no longer kept secrets, no longer hid from the past, and that had made all the difference. Mrs. Halden, too, had begun to change. She had spent years hiding behind a mask of control, but the truth had cracked it, and little by little, she was becoming someone more open, more vulnerable. She still struggled with her guilt, but she was trying to be there for Evelyn, even if it was in small ways, like taking her out to the garden for quiet walks, or offering her words of encouragement during difficult moments. One evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace in the living room, the atmosphere felt different. The tension that had once filled the space was gone. They were simply a family, together, no longer weighed down by unspoken truths or unhealed wounds. Evelyn, who had once sat silently in the corner, now found herself in the center of the conversation. She was no longer a passive observer in her own life. She participated in the discussions, sharing her thoughts on books they were reading, music they were playing, or even her small dreams for the future. Halden, looking across at his daughter, felt a quiet pride settle in his chest. She had come so far, and it was clear now that she was ready to face the world beyond Ivy Hill. He had worried about her, about how the world would treat her, but he saw now that she had the strength to handle whatever came her way. As the fire crackled, Evelyn spoke up, her voice clear and steady. "I want to go back to school," she said, her gaze meeting her father's. It was a simple request, but it carried so much weight. The thought of her stepping out into the world again, no longer confined by the walls of Ivy Hill, filled her father with both pride and fear. He smiled at her, though it was laced with uncertainty. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "You've made such progress here. School, it's a big step." Evelyn nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm ready. I know it's not going to be easy, but I want to try." Lila, sitting beside her, smiled encouragingly. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she said. "You've already taken so many steps forward, Evelyn. Going to school is just another step in your journey." The conversation shifted to logistics, how they would find the right school, how they would prepare for the transition. But for Evelyn, the most important part was that her family was supporting her. They weren't trying to hold her back anymore. They were letting her make her own choices, letting her shape her own future. That night, as the family retired to their rooms, Evelyn lingered in the hallway, looking at the portraits of her ancestors that lined the walls. For the first time, she didn't feel burdened by their gazes. She wasn't weighed down by their expectations or the pressure of carrying on their legacy. She had found her own voice, her own place in the world. She had come to realize that the legacy she would carry wasn't one of silence, but of strength. She had broken the chain that had bound her, and she was free to create her own path. The following weeks were filled with preparations. Lila helped Evelyn pick out new clothes for school, new books to read, and even helped her write letters to her old friends, reconnecting with them after all the time apart. It was a fresh start, a new chapter in her life. When the first day of school arrived, Mr. Halden took Evelyn to the front gate of Ivy Hill, his hand resting on her shoulder. He looked down at her, a mixture of pride and anxiety in his eyes. "You're ready for this," he said softly. Evelyn smiled up at him. "I think so." They shared a quiet moment before she stepped away, walking toward the bus that would take her to her new life. Lila, standing by the door, watched them both, her heart full. It wasn't just that Evelyn was going to school, it was that she was stepping into a world where she no longer had to be afraid of her own voice. She was going to speak, to live, to grow, and nothing could silence her anymore. The days ahead would hold challenges, no doubt, but as Evelyn boarded the bus, Lila knew that she was no longer the frightened girl who had been trapped in the shadows of her own silence. She was free, and nothing, not even the past, could take that away. The weeks that followed were filled with small steps, but each one was a giant leap forward for Evelyn. She had settled into the rhythm of school, something that had once seemed impossible for her. The transition had been difficult at first, but the support of her family, especially Lila, had made all the difference. Evelyn was no longer the girl who feared her own voice. She was learning to speak her truth, to face the world without the heavy burden of silence holding her back. Mr. Halden had kept his promise to be there for his daughter. He made sure to check in with her every day, helping her with her homework, asking how her day had gone, and most importantly, listening to her. The connection they had once lost was being rebuilt slowly, and though there were still moments of doubt, they both knew that they had made it through the hardest part. Mrs. Halden, too, had begun to change. Though it was more gradual, she had started to spend more time with Evelyn, doing things that mothers and daughters often do. They would go for walks in the garden, pick flowers, or simply sit together, sharing the quiet moments that had once felt so elusive. There were still times when Mrs. Halden struggled with her guilt, but she was trying, and that was all Evelyn needed. One afternoon, as the family sat down to dinner, Evelyn looked around the table. The warmth in the room, the laughter, the small exchanges between them, she realized how much had changed. It had been months since the truth had come out, and though the road to healing was still long, it was clear that they were all walking it together. She no longer felt like an outsider in her own life. "Dad," Evelyn said softly, her voice cutting through the conversation. Mr. Halden looked up at her, his eyes soft with affection. "Yes, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice gentle. Evelyn took a deep breath, the words coming more easily now. "I think I'm ready to tell my story." The room went still. Mr. Halden set down his fork, his gaze fixed on his daughter. Mrs. Halden looked at her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. It had been a long time since Evelyn had mentioned the past so openly. Lila, who had been sitting beside her, gave her an encouraging nod. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I've been writing a lot," she continued, "and I think it's time to share what I've learned, not just with you, but with everyone." Mr. Halden nodded, understanding the significance of what she was saying. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Evelyn," he said softly. "But if you want to share, we're here for you." Evelyn smiled, her heart full of gratitude. "I want to. I've been holding it inside for too long." The decision was a big one, but Evelyn knew it was the right time. She had spent so much of her life hiding from the world, from the truth, from herself. But now, she was ready to speak. That night, after dinner, the family gathered in the living room. Evelyn sat down on the couch, her notebook in hand. She took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of the pages. The weight of the moment was heavy, but she didn't back away. She knew this was part of her journey, her final step in reclaiming her life, her voice. "It's been a long time since I could really talk about what happened," Evelyn began, her voice trembling slightly, but growing steadier as she went on. "I used to think it was my fault, that if I had been faster, if I had done something different, maybe the housekeeper would still be here, but I've learned that it wasn't my fault. It was an accident. And I can't carry that guilt anymore." She paused, wiping a tear from her eye. "I've been afraid to speak, because I thought that if I said it out loud, it would make it real, like it would hurt even more. But I've been carrying that pain for so long, I don't think I can carry it anymore." She took a deep breath, looking up at her parents. "I want to be free. I want to live without this weight on my shoulders. I want to speak the truth, no matter how hard it is." Mr. Halden, his eyes full of emotion, reached over and took her hand. "You're so brave," he whispered. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore. We're here for you." Mrs. Halden, her face soft with tears, nodded. "You don't have to be afraid, Evelyn. We'll support you every step of the way." The room was filled with silence as Evelyn looked at both of her parents, their expressions full of love and understanding. She had feared this moment, but now that it had come, it felt freeing. She wasn't alone. And she wasn't defined by her past anymore. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady now. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Mr. Halden smiled at her. "We're proud of you, Evelyn. You've come so far." The family sat in the quiet, the weight of the moment settling in. They had all been through so much, but now, they were truly a family again. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel so uncertain. It felt full of possibility. The next few weeks passed quickly, but they were filled with more milestones. Evelyn continued to speak about her past when she was ready, and each time she did, she felt a little lighter. The house that had once felt so oppressive was now filled with warmth, laughter, and understanding. And while the road ahead was still long, Evelyn knew she was no longer walking it alone. She had found her voice, and she would never let it be silenced again. The days after Evelyn's decision to speak her truth were filled with quiet progress, yet the weight of the past never fully disappeared. Evelyn continued to grow in strength, her confidence steadily building. Every day, she took another step forward, embracing who she was becoming, and every day, her family supported her. Lila was there through every milestone, guiding her, encouraging her, and reminding her that her voice was powerful, that it mattered. Yet, even as Evelyn grew stronger, she still had moments where the past would rear its head, like the shadows that followed her. There were nights when she would wake from dreams she didn't fully remember, or times when the guilt would surface uninvited. In those moments, Lila would be there, offering the same quiet strength, the same patience, just as she always had. But even though those moments came, Evelyn felt something inside her shift. The weight of her silence had been replaced by the warmth of truth, and for the first time, she felt like she could take on the world. It was during one of those quiet moments, when Evelyn was sitting by the window, sketching in her notebook, that something inside her clicked. She had spent weeks, months even, finding the courage to speak, but now she realized there was more she could do. Her silence was not just a barrier she had to overcome, it was a canvas for her to express herself. She had always loved to draw, but her sketches had been limited to what was safe, what didn't require her to look too deeply into herself. Now, she wanted to draw the truth, her truth. The next day, after breakfast, Evelyn took her sketchbook outside to the garden, where the air was crisp and the sun filtered through the leaves of the trees. Lila joined her, sitting beside her on the stone bench, watching as Evelyn's pencil moved with a quiet determination across the pages. "What are you drawing?" Lila asked gently. Evelyn paused, glancing up at her, a small smile on her lips. "I'm drawing the house, but not the way it's always been. I want to draw it the way it could be: bright, open, alive, the way it feels now, with everything we've been through." Lila smiled softly, watching as Evelyn filled the pages with images of light, open spaces, and windows that let the outside world in. There were no shadows in her drawings, just light and color. For the first time in a long time, the house she had once been afraid of was being transformed into something she could call home. Over the following days, Evelyn's drawings became a way for her to work through her feelings, to communicate what words sometimes couldn't capture. She would show Lila the sketches, talking about each one with more clarity than she had ever spoken before. The more she drew, the more she felt herself unraveling the knots that had bound her for so long. One afternoon, Mr. Halden sat down with her in the living room, his eyes full of curiosity. "Evelyn," he said gently, "what's all this? Your drawings? They're beautiful, but you've never shared them before." Evelyn glanced up from her sketchbook, her face softening. "I've been keeping them inside, keeping them hidden, but I think it's time I let them out. I want to show the world what I've seen, what I've been carrying all these years." "Mr. Halden smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You're ready, Evelyn. I've seen you grow so much, and I couldn't be prouder. These are yours to share with the world when you're ready." Evelyn smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest that had not been there before. "I think I'm ready now," she said softly. As the weeks passed, Evelyn began to share her artwork with others. She took her sketchbook to school, showing her friends her drawings, explaining the meanings behind them. The world she had once been afraid to engage with now seemed like a place full of possibilities. She was no longer the quiet girl in the corner, afraid to speak up. She had something to say, and now, the world was listening. One afternoon, as Lila walked through the halls of the mansion, she found herself pausing outside Evelyn's room. She heard the soft sound of Evelyn's voice, and when she peeked inside, she saw Evelyn sitting at her desk, surrounded by her sketches, talking to her father. It wasn't the kind of conversation they had once had, filled with uncertainty and fear. Now, they were talking about her future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. Mr. Halden was sitting beside her, listening intently as Evelyn explained her dreams of studying art, of traveling the world, of using her voice to help others who had been silenced. Lila smiled softly, knowing that this was the beginning of something much bigger. Evelyn was not just finding her voice, she was shaping her future. The next day, after school, Evelyn came home with a glint in her eye. "Lila," she said excitedly, "I talked to my teacher today. She wants to help me enter an art competition. She said my work is strong enough to show in a public exhibit." Lila's heart swelled with pride. "Evelyn, that's amazing," she exclaimed. Evelyn beamed. "I never thought this could happen. I always thought my drawings were just for me, just something to help me get through the day. But now, I see they could help someone else too." Lila's smile deepened. "Your work will inspire so many people. Evelyn, you've already inspired me." Evelyn looked at her with wide eyes. "Really?" she asked, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Really?" Lila said. "You've come so far, and your art is a beautiful way of showing others how strong you are, how brave you've been." Evelyn looked down at her sketchbook, her fingers brushing over the pages. "Maybe I've always been strong," she said quietly. "I just didn't know it yet." Lila smiled, feeling the truth in Evelyn's words. She had always known that Evelyn had strength within her, but now, it was clear that she had finally found it. She was no longer defined by the past or the silence that once held her captive. She was free, and her voice, her art, would tell the world that story. As the months passed, Ivy Hill became more than just a house. It became a place where healing had taken root and begun to grow. Evelyn's life had transformed before Lila's eyes. She was no longer the timid, silent girl who had once been trapped in her own mind. Now, she was confident, radiant, and in control of her own future. Her art had become her voice, and with each drawing, each exhibit, she shared pieces of herself with the world. The art competition she had entered with the encouragement of her teacher had been a turning point. Evelyn's work was well received, not just by her peers but by strangers, by people who saw the raw emotion and strength in her pieces. She had been invited to display her art in public exhibits, her work hanging in galleries for everyone to see. It was an accomplishment she had once thought was out of reach, but now it was hers, a testament to how far she had come. The confidence she gained from sharing her art spilled into every part of her life. She spoke more openly at school, making new friends, forming deeper connections with people around her. Her teachers praised her not only for her talent but for her resilience, her ability to overcome the past and move forward. But even as she flourished, Evelyn knew there was still work to do. Healing wasn't something that happened overnight, and there were still days when the past threatened to pull her back into its darkness. There were nights when she would wake from dreams that left her unsettled, memories of the fall, the guilt that had once consumed her. But each time, she reminded herself that she was no longer the girl she used to be. She was stronger, braver, and more capable than she had ever known. One evening, after a particularly emotional art exhibit where she had showcased several of her pieces for the first time, Evelyn sat down in the living room of Ivy Hill with Lila. The house was quiet, the sounds of the outside world muffled by the walls, and it felt like a safe haven, a place where they could talk without fear. Evelyn looked at Lila, her eyes full of emotion. "Lila," she began softly, "I've come so far. But sometimes, I still feel scared, like the past is always lurking behind me, waiting to pull me back in." Lila smiled warmly, sitting beside her. "It's okay to feel that way," she said gently. "You've come a long way, Evelyn. You've faced so many fears and challenges, and you're doing it with strength. But healing is a journey. It's okay to take it one step at a time." Evelyn nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edges of her sketchbook. "I know," she said, "but it's hard sometimes, especially when I see how far I've come and then feel that old fear creep back in. I don't want to be afraid anymore." Lila's heart swelled with compassion. She had seen Evelyn grow from someone who could barely speak into someone who now expressed herself with confidence. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Evelyn," Lila said softly. "Fear doesn't define you. It's just a feeling, and it's one that you've learned to face. You've proven that you can take control of your own life. You've found your voice, and nothing can take that away from you." Evelyn smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Lila. I don't know what I would have done without you." Lila smiled back, her heart full of warmth. "You've done all the hard work, Evelyn. I'm just happy I've been able to walk this path with you." It was in moments like these that Evelyn realized just how much she had changed, and how far she had come. She wasn't just healing from her past. She was building a new future, one that was full of possibility. The fear she had once lived with had no place in her life anymore. She had a voice, and she was going to use it to shape her own destiny. The following weeks brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. Evelyn was offered a scholarship to attend an art program at a prestigious college, something that had seemed like an impossible dream only a year ago. The idea of leaving Ivy Hill, of stepping into a new world, was both exciting and intimidating. She had spent most of her life in the comfort of her home, surrounded by the safety of her family. But she knew it was time. She had to take the next step in her journey, to leave behind the familiar and step into the unknown. When she told her parents about the scholarship, they were overwhelmed with pride and joy. Mr. Halden hugged her tightly, tears of happiness welling in his eyes. "I always knew you had it in you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've worked so hard, Evelyn. This is just the beginning of everything you're going to achieve." Mrs. Halden, too, was filled with pride, though she was still learning how to express her emotions fully. "I'm so proud of you, Evelyn," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "You've made us all so proud." Lila, too, was there, supporting Evelyn every step of the way. She knew how much this opportunity meant to Evelyn, how it symbolized everything she had overcome. "You deserve this, Evelyn," she said with a smile. "You've earned it." The days leading up to her departure were filled with preparation. Evelyn packed her bags, filled with excitement, nerves, and anticipation. She was leaving behind the life she had known, but she was also stepping into a future she had created for herself. When the day finally arrived, the entire family stood together at the door of Ivy Hill, watching as Evelyn prepared to leave. Mr. Halden placed his hand on her shoulder. "We'll always be here for you," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude and determination. "I know," she said softly. "Thank you for everything." As she stepped into the car that would take her to her new life, Evelyn felt a mixture of fear and excitement, but more than anything, she felt free. She had found her voice, and now, she was ready to take on the world. Months passed, and with each day, Evelyn's life blossomed in ways that once seemed impossible. She had embraced her new world with courage and determination. Her art program at the prestigious college had become the catalyst for a new chapter in her life, one filled with challenges, opportunities, and most importantly, growth. The adjustment was not without its difficulties. The new environment was both thrilling and overwhelming at times. Evelyn was no longer the quiet girl hiding behind the walls of Ivy Hill. She was a young woman carving out her future, one brushstroke at a time. Her professors were impressed with her talent and drive, and her classmates quickly recognized her ability to express herself in ways that were raw and honest. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by people who understood the power of art to communicate emotions, to tell stories that words could not capture. Despite her progress, there were moments when Evelyn felt the weight of her past, a quiet reminder of the years she had spent trapped in silence. On those days, when the memories threatened to overwhelm her, she would pick up her sketchbook and pour her feelings into her art. She had learned to use her creativity as a means of self-expression, and it was a cathartic release. Each line and shade was a step toward freeing herself from the shadows of the past. One evening, after a long day of classes, Evelyn sat in her dorm room, sketching quietly. The walls around her were decorated with pieces of her own work, each one a reflection of her journey. As she looked at the drawings, she felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a yearning for something more. She had come so far, but there was still a part of her that longed to connect with the people she had left behind at Ivy Hill, her family, Lila, and the house that had once been her refuge. She missed them. It wasn't that she regretted her decision to leave. The scholarship had opened doors that she never thought possible, but the distance was hard to bear. She missed the quiet moments with Lila, the late-night conversations with her father, and even the long walks through the garden with her mother. The next weekend, she made the decision to visit Ivy Hill. It had been months since she had left, and the longing in her heart grew stronger every day. When she arrived, the house looked the same, yet different. The familiar scent of the garden and the soft hum of the world outside greeted her, but the weight of change was evident in the way the house seemed to embrace her, as though it was ready to welcome her home again. Mr. Halden was the first to greet her at the door, his face lit up with a smile that Evelyn hadn't seen in months. "Evelyn," he exclaimed, pulling her into a warm hug. "It's so good to see you. We've missed you." His voice was thick with emotion, and Evelyn could feel the love radiating from him. "I've missed you too, Dad," she whispered, her voice choked with the intensity of the moment. Mrs. Halden soon joined them, her smile softer, yet just as full of love. "I'm so glad you're home, Evelyn," she said quietly. "It's been too long." Evelyn hugged her mother, feeling the warmth of her embrace. It was a feeling she hadn't realized she'd missed so much. "I missed you too, Mom." That evening the family gathered around the dinner table, just as they used to. The atmosphere was warm, filled with the comfort of familiar faces and shared memories. They talked about everything: her art school, the new friends she had made, the challenges and triumphs of her life away from home. But even as Evelyn spoke about her new life, she couldn't help but feel a sense of longing for the past. The table, the laughter, the connection, they were all pieces of her journey that had shaped her into the person she was today. As dinner drew to a close, Evelyn found herself outside, standing in the garden where she had spent so many hours in silence. The stars above her shone brightly, casting a soft glow over the landscape. She felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. She was back in the place that had once been her world, but she was not the same girl who had left. The journey she had taken had changed her in ways she couldn't fully explain. "I've missed this," Evelyn whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. It wasn't just the house she missed, it was the sense of belonging, the connection to the people she loved. But she knew now that she didn't have to choose between the two worlds. Ivy Hill would always be a part of her, but she had her own path to follow, one that was uniquely hers. She walked slowly through the garden, her thoughts swirling with the promise of the future. She had found her voice, and it had carried her to places she had never imagined. But there was still so much more to discover, and she was ready for it. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast with her parents, Evelyn stood at the front door, ready to leave once again. Mr. Halden and Mrs. Halden stood beside her, their arms around each other, watching as she prepared to return to her life at school. "We're so proud of you, Evelyn," Mr. Halden said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've done everything you set out to do, and more." Evelyn smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied softly. "Thank you for believing in me." She hugged them both tightly before stepping out into the world, her future waiting for her. As she drove away from Ivy Hill, Evelyn felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't leaving the past behind, she was carrying it with her. Every lesson, every memory, every step. And as she looked ahead, she knew that the best was yet to come. As Evelyn settled back into the rhythm of her life at school, there was a feeling of quiet contentment that surrounded her. The bustle of college life, the demands of her art program, and the friendships she had built all played a part in shaping her world. But even amidst the excitement of her newfound independence, the echoes of Ivy Hill, her family, and the past continued to shape her path. It wasn't that she missed home, at least not in the way she once had. What she missed was the sense of belonging, the moments of connection, the quiet support of those who had loved her through her darkest times. It was different now, though. Evelyn was different. She had grown into someone stronger, someone who no longer needed to hide behind silence. She had a voice, and that voice was shaping her world in ways she hadn't imagined. One day, while sitting in the common area of her dorm, Evelyn received a phone call from Mr. Halden. His voice was filled with warmth and pride as he spoke. "Evelyn, we've been keeping track of your progress, and we're so proud of you. Your artwork has been noticed. The gallery has asked to feature your work in a larger exhibition, and I think it's time for you to show the world what you've become." Evelyn felt her heart race as she processed the news. The gallery was one of the most prestigious in the city, and the idea of her art being displayed there was something she hadn't dared to dream about. "Dad, I don't even know what to say. This is huge." Her voice trembled with emotion, the weight of the moment sinking in. Mr. Halden laughed softly. "You've earned it, Evelyn. You've worked so hard, and you deserve this. We're all so proud of how far you've come." Evelyn smiled to herself, feeling a surge of pride. This was the culmination of years of hard work, of overcoming her fears, of finding her voice. It wasn't just about the art, it was about who she had become through the process. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without all of you. You've all been my support, my strength." After they hung up, Evelyn sat in silence for a while, processing everything. The exhibition was just the beginning, a milestone that marked the culmination of her journey. But it was more than that. It was a reflection of her transformation, a testament to how far she had come. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt a sense of peace with herself. She had once been afraid of her own voice, but now, she had learned to embrace it, to use it to express herself in ways that felt true and freeing. As the exhibition drew closer, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the person she had been when she first left Ivy Hill. She had been so uncertain, so unsure of herself. But now, standing on the brink of something greater, she realized just how much had changed. She had found her purpose, her passion, and most importantly, her voice. The night of the exhibition, Evelyn stood in front of her displayed works, a quiet sense of wonder settling over her. The gallery was filled with people, art lovers, critics, fellow students, and she could feel their eyes on her work, appreciating the depth and emotion in each piece. The walls that had once seemed so daunting now felt like a canvas, a space for her to share her story. As she walked through the exhibit, her parents found her, beaming with pride. Mr. Halden embraced her tightly, his words full of admiration. "Evelyn, I'm so proud of you. You've truly come into your own. This is just the beginning." Mrs. Halden, too, was filled with pride, though her expression was quieter, more reserved. "You've done it, Evelyn. You've turned your pain into something beautiful." Evelyn smiled, feeling the weight of their words. She wasn't the same person who had left Ivy Hill months ago. She had transformed, and so had her family. The bond they shared was no longer defined by silence, but by understanding, by support, and by love. As the night went on, the crowd gathered around her, offering compliments, asking questions about her work. She answered with confidence, her words flowing freely as she talked about the emotions behind her art, the journey it had taken to get there. It was a new feeling being seen, being heard, and she relished it. As the evening wound down, Lila joined her face alight with excitement. "Evelyn, this is incredible," she said, hugging her tightly. "I'm so proud of you. You've done it." Evelyn laughed, feeling her heart swell with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lila. You've been there every step of the way." Lila smiled warmly, her eyes filled with pride. "I'm just glad to have been part of your journey, Evelyn. You're amazing." Evelyn looked around at the gallery, at the people who had come to see her work, and she realized that this was just the beginning. The future was full of possibilities, of opportunities to share her art, her voice, and her story. She had learned to embrace who she was, to stand tall in the face of fear and doubt, and now she was ready to take on whatever came next. As she looked at the people around her, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the support she had received along the way, especially from her family, who had believed in her when she had struggled to believe in herself. With a final look at her displayed work, Evelyn turned to Lila and smiled. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said, her voice full of confidence. "The world is waiting for me." And with that, Evelyn knew she was ready to face whatever the future held, her voice stronger and clearer than ever before. As the years passed, Evelyn's life continued to unfold in ways that felt both familiar and new. Her art flourished, her confidence soared, and she found herself embracing the world around her with a sense of purpose that had once seemed out of reach. The memories of Ivy Hill, the family, the silence, the pain were no longer her burden. They had become part of her story, but not the whole of it. Evelyn had learned to live beyond them, to find joy, peace, and meaning in the world she was creating for herself. Her work was now showcased in galleries across the country, and she had become a recognized artist in her own right. Yet, it wasn't the recognition that mattered most to her, it was the freedom to express herself fully and authentically. She had learned to speak through her art, but even more, she had learned to speak without fear. She had found her voice, and that voice resonated in every canvas, every line, every color. She had come to understand that healing was not a destination but a journey, one that would continue to unfold in its own time. Her family, too, had changed in ways that Evelyn could never have predicted. Mr. Halden, once a man driven by fear and guilt, had become a father who listened, who understood, and who gave his daughter the space to become her own person. His relationship with Evelyn had grown into one of deep mutual respect, one that was built on honesty and openness. He had not just accepted her changes, he had embraced them. Mrs. Halden, too, had become a quieter, gentler presence in Evelyn's life. Though her journey had been slower, she had learned to shed the walls she had built around herself, and her relationship with Evelyn deepened as a result. The three of them, together, had created a new dynamic, one that was based not on the silences and secrets of the past, but on the willingness to be vulnerable, to listen, and to love. As the years went by, the visits to Ivy Hill became less frequent, but the bond between Evelyn and her family remained as strong as ever. They were no longer bound by the weight of unspoken words. Instead, they had built a foundation of communication, of shared experiences, and of mutual support. Evelyn had not only healed but had transformed her family along with her. One day, as she stood before a canvas in her studio, reflecting on the path that had led her here, Evelyn realized something important. She had spent so many years running from her past, fearing the silence, fearing the things she could not control. But now, she knew that her past had shaped her into the person she was today. It had made her stronger, more empathetic, and more aware of the importance of speaking up, of being heard. She no longer feared her own story. She embraced it. As she placed the final touches on her latest painting, Evelyn smiled to herself. The painting was vibrant, full of life, and in many ways, it represented the person she had become. It was a piece of her soul laid bare, no longer hidden behind silence or fear. It was her truth, and for the first time, She understood that sharing her story was not just an act of courage, it was an act of freedom. She no longer needed to hide, to retreat into the shadows. She was ready to step into the light. With that realization, Evelyn made a decision. She would host her own exhibition, a showcase of everything she had learned and everything she had overcome. It wasn't just about displaying her work. It was about sharing her journey, her healing, and the message that it was okay to speak, to be vulnerable, and to embrace the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. As the date of her exhibition approached, she felt both nervous and excited. This was a new chapter, one that would mark the culmination of all her hard work, her emotional growth, and her transformation. The night of the exhibit, Evelyn stood before her artwork, surrounded by family, friends, and strangers who had come to appreciate her work. It was a moment of triumph, a moment she had once thought was beyond her reach. And as she spoke to the crowd, sharing her story, her voice steady and clear, she realized that this was the beginning of something even bigger. She was no longer just an artist. She was a storyteller, a beacon of hope for others who had once felt silenced by their pasts. Looking around at the people who had come to witness her journey, Evelyn felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had found her voice, and it was stronger than she had ever imagined. But more than that, she had found her purpose. She had taken her pain, her fear, and her silence, and turned it into something beautiful. And in doing so, she had given herself the freedom to live fully and authentically. She had not only reclaimed her voice, she had reclaimed her life. As the evening came to a close, Evelyn looked around at the faces of those who had come to support her, and she knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her voice, and to trust the people who had walked beside her. And with that trust, she was ready to take on whatever came next, knowing that she could face it with strength, grace, and the power of her own truth. Evelyn had come a long way, but her journey was far from over. The future was full of possibility, and she was ready to embrace it all.